morning, everybody. We're so glad that you are here. Thank you so much for joining us here on our Hot Topic show that we do in the morning, just to catch you up. We have a very special guest for you this morning. It is Aidan McLaughlin, and Aidan is the editor over at Mediaite. Aidan, what is your exact title there? You editor-in-chief?
Editor-in-chief, yes.
Editor-in-chief of Mediaite, which is a fantastic site owned by our friend Dan Abrams, which really focuses on the news business, right? And also politics, etc. One of the #1 sites in the country and fast growing, not new, but still fast growing. The reason we're a little bit late is because we have some breaking news. We had an entirely different show planned for you. And then I noticed that my friend Aidan McLaughlin broke some news overnight, which has to do with the person who is being considered to be the defense secretary in the United States. He has some exclusive information that he got. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the show. We're going to start with breaking news. There is a newly released police report that details how in 2017, a California woman told officers that Trump cabinet pick Pete Hegseth, you know, he is the Fox News weekend morning host who they're considering for Secretary of Defense, that he physically blocked her from leaving a hotel room, took her phone, and then, according to the report, then he assaulted her. SA, as they say, okay? That we have to be careful what we say on certain sites, as you know, Aidan. So anyway, the 22-page report lays out the competing narratives of what happened in new detail and offers a graphic, disturbing look into the alleged actions of a man who may become the Secretary of Defense. Okay, Aidan, take us through what happened. Again, this is 2017. This is in Monterey, California. Where was Pete Hegseth allegedly at the time, and what happened?
So it's 2017. Pete Hegseth is an Iraq and Afghanistan war veteran. At the time, he was working at Fox News as a host. And he was a speaker at a Republican women's convention in Monterey, California. Mm-hmm. And the convention is at this Hyatt hotel. And so everyone's staying there and attending the conference there. Now, the police report that we have lays out different narratives from different sides of what happened. There are interviews with Pete Hegseth. There are interviews with his accuser, who is identified only as Jane Doe, and we still don't know her identity. She still remained anonymous. And then there's testimony from one hotel worker who was working at the front desk and a couple associates of the woman who claimed she was assaulted by Hegseth. So in her telling, which is what the police report starts off with, is basically they learned of the allegation because she went into the hospital a couple days after the night in question to get a rape kit done. And the nurse at the hospital contacted the police, and the police then spoke subsequently with Jane Doe. And according to her, what she told police was that she was at this conference and she met Pete at a bar in the hotel on the final night of the conference. And she took issue with the way that he was behaving towards women. Now, two separate women, told police in their own interviews with police that Pete at the conference was being very flirty with women, that he put his hand on their legs and propositioned them to go back to his rooms. That's two separate women. Now, just bear in mind at the time, Pete had just had the birth of his daughter with his soon-to-be third wife. So he is married at the time. Then the Jane Doe, his accuser, says that she confronted him about the way he was treating women at the conference. Jane Doe is also married. The two then had an argument out by the pool that apparently got so loud that multiple hotel guests called the front desk. The worker at the front desk came out and told them to calm down. The worker said that Pete appeared very drunk and that he yelled at the hotel worker and said that he has free speech. And the Jane Doe reassured the hotel worker that they were both Republicans, which is an interesting funny little part of the police report.
And also the free speech thing is also very interesting because that has been a narrative over the last couple of years, but we'll get in.
Yeah, we can get into that. Right. Also, very much the kind of thing that a drunk guy at a bar says when somebody tells him he's being too loud. But in any case, she then says that her memory becomes fuzzy. The next thing she remembers, she wakes up or she comes to. She has her memory is refreshed. She's in a hotel room and she's having what she later said was non-consensual sex with Pete Hegseth. Then we have an interview with Pete Hegseth. Now, Pete, through a lawyer, has denied that the sex was non-consensual, excuse me. He says the sex was entirely consensual, that he met her at this conference, that he was quite drunk, that she pursued him, that they went back to the hotel room, had sex, and that's all that happened. Now, the woman in question never pressed charges. Pete was never charged with a crime. He denies it to this day. But a couple of years later, he did pay the woman to sign a non-disclosure agreement to not talk about the incident. So that in detail is what this police report reveals. And we already knew that there was this claim against Pete Hegseth because it was brought to the attention of the Trump transition team after he was named nominated to be Secretary of Defense. But this report lays out in a lot of detail the competing narratives about what happened that night.
Wow. Aiden, that's a lot. We knew, and this is the woman that his attorneys admitted that he paid off apparently for a lot of money. But the reason that he did it, according to the attorney, is because if this came to light, that he would immediately, he believed, and the attorney says that he would be fired from Fox News or he would lose his job.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah. So what the lawyer said, first of all, there's no dispute about whether these two had sex. And there's also no dispute that Pete Hegseth paid off this woman to sign a non-disclosure agreement. What the lawyer claims is that Pete was trying to protect his reputation. He was a prominent host at Fox News. This happened right at in 2017, which is really the heart of the Me Too movement. So it was a very charged time. I believe that the payment was made in 2021, so it was a couple years later. But still, the lawyer maintains that this payoff was made purely to protect Pete's reputation, also to protect his family. His third wife, who he's now married to, he has several kids with. So that was the thinking there. Of course, you get nominated for Secretary of Defense. This is the kind of stuff that comes out. I can't imagine he was surprised by it.
Well, anytime you want to run for a government office, which is why many people don't run, because they don't want folks going into their backgrounds. But I mean, this is crazy. By the way, Pete Hegseth is a young man, 3 wives, and then I think an affair on top of that.
A couple of affairs. So he was married to his first wife, and he then had an affair with his second wife, and then got married to her, and then he was married to her, and they had children, and he then had an affair with a producer at Fox and Friends, which was the show he was on at Fox News, and she got pregnant. And when she got pregnant, they decided they could not hide the affair anymore. It had been going on for 3 years at that point. And so he alerted Fox, and Fox News moved the producer off of Fox and Friends onto a weekend show. And so then they got together, and then a couple months after his daughter was born with the current wife, was when this encounter happened in Monterey.
Should we say allegedly, or is this all confirmed?
Well, this is all confirmed. He admitted to the first affair. He said that it was in an interview, I believe. He was talking about traditional marriage, and he said that what he's learned through his own indiscretions is that he should be a better man and should fight through his wavering. And that was the first marriage. So we know about the affair in the first marriage. In the second marriage, we know about the affair because a child came from it. And then we know about the affair in the third marriage because both sides agree that they at least had sex in Monterey, California at the conference. Just one side claims it's consensual. The other side claims it was non-consensual. I know it's exhausting just thinking about it.
Well, it's just exhausting because when you hear the sort of holier than thou attitude from the folks over at Fox, and it's an interesting thing also, I want to get into it a little bit later on as we talk more about the media, but just how the right and even Fox News will protect, their folks, and the left and even sort of centrist media, they don't do the same thing, right? You sort of have the Al Franken effect where they just, even an allegation, they'll just jettison folks. The question is, did Fox News know about this?
So I've spoken to sources at Fox News who say they had no idea.
Really?
And I don't, it's always hard to tell when you're dealing with news networks that obviously have an interest in claiming ignorance. I don't necessarily disbelieve that. I think that if I were, Pete Hegseth and I needed to pay off a woman, I don't think, and one of the reasons I was doing it was to keep it quiet. I don't think I would inform my employer about it.
But if you were absolutely sure that if you said, look, this is not true, that, this is a money grab, someone's out, wouldn't you inform them and say, this is all completely not true, I intend to fight this?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to not have to think about that like Pete Hegseth. But
let's talk about that when we talk about the. Go on. What did you want to say?
Yeah, but I think it's entirely possible that was part of the motivation of keeping it quiet, or that he did in fact tell Fox, and they're not being forthcoming about that.
Yeah.
And to be clear, Fox has not said publicly whether they knew or not. I don't think. But privately in my conversations with people at Fox, they say that they had no idea.
Well, I mean, since we're here now, so then what happens? Obviously, him becoming the Secretary of Defense, I'm sure, is in peril. This will not help. Maybe Donald Trump will stand by him. Who knows? But then what happens now at Fox News?
So he's been let go by Fox.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the first thing. The first thing Fox News did, whenever anyone is either up for a government position or has announced a candidacy.
Gotcha. I thought it was over this. I understand that. So he resigned, or Fox said, you got to go.
As soon as he was nominated, that was it for him.
Okay, got it. I understand that. Yeah.
I actually asked an executive whether or not they'd have him back before the detail of these allegations really came out, and I didn't get an answer. They just said, let's see how the confirmation process goes. The thing about someone like Pete Hegseth is that I don't think he was ever a great fit for Fox News, because the network attempts to have to maintain its credibility as a news network, and Pete Hegseth is someone who has never really fallen in line with that. I mean, he's worn a MAGA hat on air. He was, in Trump's first term, he was lobbying Trump privately and publicly on air to pardon war criminals, men accused of war crimes. So he's never really behaved like a journalist. He doesn't consider himself a journalist. And so, to be honest, I think a much better fit for him would be, taking the Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly route and going into independent media and building up an audience there.
An X would be perfect for him, I think.
Exactly. So,
Rumble,
don't cry for Pete Hegseth if he has trouble in his confirmation hearings. He's going to be fine. That said, I don't know if he's going to have trouble getting confirmed, because it seems like part of the new world that we live in, and particularly the incoming administration, is that they don't have much of a problem with these kinds of allegations, because Trump himself has survived these kinds of allegations.
And has been found guilty, at least liable. Yeah.
So, for Trump, I think if he sees that one of his, cabinet appointees or nominees has allegations that, mirror those that Trump have fought against his entire life, I don't think he necessarily sees that as a problem. Although you talk to reporters who have covered Trump for a long time, he doesn't like distractions that, spark negative headlines and take the attention off of him. So who knows? But to be honest, I think after the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, this kind of stuff has far less weight than it used to.
Interesting. Let's go through some of the things. We got off a little bit talking about the media, and then we'll get back to that. Let's go through the report. Let's put up some of the information that you have in your report. Put it up, producers. The first quote that we have from Aidan McLaughlin here we go. An emergency room nurse contacted police in 2017 after treating a woman who said that while drinking with colleagues after a political gathering several nights earlier, she may have been drugged. She said, may have been drugged and then sexually assaulted. I mean, this goes beyond, if you look at this, right? Accusations of drugging someone, that's more serious than even an E. Jean Carroll in a room. All of it's awful. But that adds another layer on top of it, which is kind of similar to what's happening with Matt Gaetz and these alleged party drugs, etc. Aidan?
Yeah. So definitely. And in terms of the police report unfortunately is a little bit vague about what it says in terms of what she was claiming. She says that she had been drinking that night and that her memory became fuzzy at one point. As far as I could tell, there's no record of her telling the police that she thought she had been drugged. at least in the police report that we obtained. But she did tell the nurse that administered the rape kit for her, who contacted police, that she believed that she had been drugged because she couldn't explain why her memory had become so spotty throughout the evening. So yeah, I mean, that would certainly, obviously, yeah, drugging someone takes this to a whole nother level. Again, Pete Hegseth, through a lawyer, denies it all. But he actually claims that he was the one who was intoxicated. He said he was buzzed, not drunk, at least in an interview with police a couple of weeks after the incident. But he says that that she pursued him, that she came back to his room with him, and then he thought it was curious that she would not leave, and that the two had consensual sex after that.
Well, it said that, there's all details in the police report. We'll go on. Maybe we'll get some of that in. But again, it says a non-disclosure agreement, an undisclosed sum. Do you have any idea of how much money this was?
Do not know. No, do not have any idea. The interesting thing there, just to get into sort of specifics a little bit, is that typically when we deal with non-disclosure agreements with cable news stars, we're talking about the money that the networks pay out to accusers, and those sums are enormous. Bill O'Reilly, when he was ousted by Fox News, it was revealed that tens of millions of dollars was paid by the network to women who had accused him of misconduct. So typically when we hear these sums, they're enormous. But if we take Fox News's word that they had no idea about this payoff, that means that Pete Hegseth was paying out of his own pocket. Now, I'm sure he was handsomely paid at Fox, but that leads me to believe that the payoff was not as extensive as some of these 10, 20, $30 million payoffs that you see from cable news networks, which obviously have the operating budget to make these payments and keep it moving.
Next slide, please, so we can go through with Aiden what's in his report. Okay, next slide. Two different women who attended the conference and spoke with police said that Hegseth put his hand on their legs and asked them to come back to his room on separate occasions. One of the women who worked at the conference told police that she told Hegseth the physical contact was not acceptable. So there were other women involved. They did not file charges. They were just witnesses to what is going on. Are they listed in the report?
Correct. So the report is redacted and all the names are protected for obvious reasons, but police spoke to several women at the conference who described Pete Hegseth as coming on to them. They said that, and I was shocked reading this because you read one of these testimonies from these women, and they say that Pete Hegseth put his hand on her leg and then asked her to come back up to his room. And then I read that same thing again, and I thought that it was just two different police officers interviewing the same woman. And then I realized quite quickly that it was two different women who both claimed the same thing. They both said that Pete put his hand on their legs and then asked for them to come back to his room. So that's what preceded the meeting between Pete's accuser and Pete, because she says that she came over while he was sort of flirting with all these women, and he was being told off by one of the women for putting his hand on her leg. And our Jane Doe said, basically told him that she didn't appreciate how he treated women. That started their interaction and the apparent argument by the pool.
Is this three women in one night, by the way? It's the accuser and then two other women. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And so, and in fact, in text messages, the police report has text messages between Pete's accuser and another person who's unidentified, in which she says that Pete had been sort of flirting with all the women at the conference, that the women were, found him dreamy, but that it was all very creepy because he had a ring on and he was trying to sleep with all these women.
Okay, one more slide, and then we'll get to something else, because Aiden, I'm sure you have a very busy day in front of you. But again, also it says in there that they were concerned about the way that he treated women. So police spoke with the staff in the front desk of the hotel. He said that around 1:30, and this just sort of goes through what you said. He talked about freedom of speech. We hear so much about freedom of speech from especially conservatives and these folks who are on social media platforms. And it seems that they have no idea what freedom of speech means. You cannot just start yelling at people and touching people or embarrassing them in public. Yes, there's freedom of speech, but you're not free to be an a-hole in certain places, and you have to conduct yourself into the terms of services on these sites. But also, if a hotel or a venue says you're acting improperly, they have the right to tell you when to go. They have no idea, it seems, and Pete Hegseth as well, what actual freedom of speech is.
Yeah, I mean, so this is the part of the story when the hotel worker who was working at the front desk that night, and around 1:30 a.m., he got 2 calls from different people in the hotel who said there was a disturbance down by the pool. He walked over to the pool. He found Pete Hegseth and his accuser. And Pete, who he said looked very drunk, began to curse at him, said he had freedom of speech, which obviously, I'm sure I don't know the hotel worker in question. I'm sure he knows that. And I'm sure this was not a case of free speech. It was a case of 2 people being drunk and loud at a pool. Then basically the woman took Pete Hegseth away, according to the hotel worker. And then we do have surveillance footage that has not been publicly released, but that the police describe in the report, which shows Pete Hegseth and the accuser locked arms walking down a hallway, and the accuser appears to be smiling. So Pete Hegseth's lawyer has seized upon that and said that it shows that this was a consensual encounter between the 2, because they were laughing, and they had or at least she appears to be smiling, and they had their arms locked together. So obviously that does not mean that it didn't happen, but that's what Pete Hegseth's defense is that this had always been a consensual encounter, and that there was nothing sort of sinister about it.
Okay, so we'll see where this goes, and just to put a button on it for now. Look, it's in an odd way, as you say, this might be helpful since Donald Trump will think I've been accused of this, and the folks they'll just say it's a witch hunt.
It's a witch hunt
after Pete Hegseth, correct?
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I think we live in a very different world than we did a couple of years ago, when something like this would have scuttled a nomination in 50 seconds. I think the fact that Matt Gaetz was nominated to run the Justice Department, even when we knew all of the claims against him, and it appears that that they're going to advance his nomination, and that there's a chance that he might get nominated to be Attorney General, I think shows how far we've come in terms of what people deem acceptable for cabinet positions.
What's crazy, and not even just in the last couple of years. I mean, look, even over just the last couple of 2 weeks, I think this actually changes things out in the world, right? That, hey, look, this whole idea, this is taking the whole idea of canceling cancel culture to an entirely different level. Let's talk about cable news. Do you have a couple minutes to talk about cable news?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so let's talk about cable news. A shocker to the cable news system, and can we call it the Trump resistance from both a Republican, Joe Scarborough, and on a liberal or a left-leaning network. When this happened on Monday morning, it sent shockwaves really around the world. Here it is. Watch.
Past week, Joe and I have heard from so many people, from political leaders to regular citizens, deeply dismayed by several of President-elect Trump's cabinet selections, and they are scared. Last Thursday, we expressed our own concerns on this broadcast and even said we would appreciate the opportunity to speak with the president-elect himself. On Friday, we were given the opportunity to do just that. Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump. It was the first time we have seen him in 7 years.
Now, we talked about a lot of issues, including abortion, mass deportation, threats of political retribution against political opponents, and media outlets. We talked about that a good bit. And it's going to come as no surprise to anybody who watches this show, has watched it over the past year or over the past decade, that we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, and we told him so.
What we did agree on was to restart communications. My father often spoke with world leaders with whom he and the United States profoundly disagreed. That's a task shared by reporters and commentators alike. We had not spoken to President Trump since March of 2020, other than a personal call Joe made to Trump on the morning after the attempt on his life in Butler, Pennsylvania. In this meeting, President Trump was cheerful, he was upbeat, he seemed interested in finding common ground with Democrats on some of the most divisive issues. And for those asking why we would go speak to the president-elect during such fraught times, especially between us, I guess I would ask back, why wouldn't we?
Okay, pause.
5 years of political warfare has deeply...
Thank you. Look, I like Joe. I don't know Mika that well. I mean, go on. I've watched your face when you were.
I will say I'm a little bit of an apologist when it comes to this. I don't think there's anything wrong with going to meet with Trump. I know people say that it's hypocritical because they warned that he was this massive threat, and now they're going down and kissing the ring at Mar-a-Lago. The thing that bothered me about this was the tone, and this is a bit of a nitpick, but my God, I think John Berman, your former colleague at CNN, said it was like they were announcing the Yalta summit. I thought that was like the best way to put it, because I mean, you drove an hour down to Mar-a-Lago
from Jupiter. They're in Jupiter.
It's less, 20 minutes, and you met with Donald Trump like everyone else in the media who's met with Donald Trump. You know, he holds court at Mar-a-Lago. People go down and they meet him. It's not Yalta, but I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I think it's an exceedingly risky move for MSNBC hosts to do when the network is down in the ratings toilet after Trump's win. And, the audience is already very upset about it. And then you have two of its flagship hosts going down and saying, oh, well, we have to find common ground with Trump.
Yeah.
When I first saw it, it reminded me, I likened it to, imagine if Fox News after 2020, when there was that massive viewer exodus of all these, the audience fleeing in droves because they called the election for Joe Biden. Imagine if, Sean Hannity announced on the air that night that he went and met with President-elect Joe Biden. I mean, the ratings would have plummeted even further. So that's what interests me about this, was that it was a very risky play for the audience.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, because we have a very similar reaction, Aiden. When I first saw it, I was like, wait, I did this. Like, wait, what? What is going on? I don't think that there's anything wrong with meeting. It is interesting when you've been the resistance in the way that they were. Will you grant me that, right?
Yes.
That's right.
The hair on fire alarmism about Trump turning into, oh, well, we didn't see eye to eye on these issues and we went down to meet with him, and it's a bit of a head turn.
Do you remember, were you at Mediaite back in 2016 when Donald Trump invited all the news anchors? I don't know if it was before my time at Mediaite, but I think I remember that. It was either Trump Tower or the White House. I forget if it was in 16 or 17, but he invited all of them. And then I chose not to go, and I chose to put in a request for an interview, because I said to Jeff at the time, he said, you can go if you want, Don, or you don't have to go. And I said, I'm not going to go. I'm going to put in an interview request, because I think he's going to use this as an opportunity to slam the media. It's going to be like a talking point for him on social media, blah, blah, blah. And surely that's what he did. And I thought it was best to be transparent and say, I would love to interview you. We can discuss, rather than doing it in a silo. Let's do it transparently in front of the American people. An interview that is fair, and we will not edit the interview. We'll run it in its entirety. And that's what I wanted to do with him. So, I'm not sure I would have gone to Mar-a-Lago, maybe a phone call or something, but I don't see any. Look, if you want to meet with him, it's fine. Also, he is the president-elect of the United States, so you have to cover him. If I could get an interview with him, I would certainly get an interview, but I'm not sure about some sort of summit. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think the thing that makes me a little bit sympathetic to meeting with him is that, okay, they've warned that he was a danger, a threat to the country and to democracy for the last couple of years, but he's the president now. He got elected. Tens of millions of people voted for him. He won in a free and fair election. He beat Kamala Harris. He beat Democrats. He beat Morning Joe. Now he's the president, and he's going to be the president for the next 4 years. You can't pretend that he's not. And I don't, and I think just from a purely cynical view, they probably looked at it and said, okay, do we want to be the resistance on the outside, throwing, rocks at the castle?
Or the resistance on the inside.
Or do we want to have some power here and and this is a way to do that. You know, there is reporting out there, and I've heard this from people at MSNBC, that there was some fear from Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski about potentially facing retribution from Trump and his administration.
I don't know if I buy that.
I think some people find a little bit silly or ridiculous the idea that the Trump administration would ever do something to punish two, you know, massively famous and influential cable news hosts. But you know, when you get down to the specifics of what Trump could do, there are a lot of things that he could do that would be very dangerous. And Steve Bannon, who was his senior advisor in the first administration, has already called on Matt Gaetz, if he becomes attorney general, to crack down on MSNBC. And there's all sorts of things from, you know, harassment all the way up to prosecution that a Justice Department can do to target a media organization.
They're coming to get you now, Aiden.
Sorry. Yeah. They're outside. Yeah.
Aiden, let me set this up for you. So we're going to talk about the media, especially cable news broadly. Okay. So you have Joe and Mika do that. And then you know, I don't know, I think it was the same day later on. This came from Comcast chief legal officer Tom Reed, a statement to Brendan Carr, who's been nominated to become the FCC chair. Commissioner Carr's successful track record at the FCC and his extensive knowledge of communications industry are vital to the continued success of America's digital future. We congratulate him on his appointment and commend President-elect Trump on his choice. We welcome Commissioner Carr's continued leadership on important issues like broadband investment and deregulation, blah, 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 blah. So they want a favorable, relationship with the administration in case they have business in front of the government. Am I correct? Right? Yeah.
And can you blame them? You know, this is the next 4 years is going to be a Trump administration. Everyone in it's going to be Trump appointees. If you are, you know, if you run Comcast, you know, there's no reason to be on the wrong side of that. And I think that's why
Comcast owns MSNBC and CNBC, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And for now, at least, you know, you don't want to ruffle any feathers. I think that's, you know, we saw that with Jeff Bezos spiking the Washington Post editorial board endorsement a couple of weeks ago. Now he doesn't say that it was because he feared an incoming Trump administration, but that's what a lot of people believed.
But we all remember when AT&T wanted to buy what is it, Time Warner, which owned CNN. Donald Trump held it up.
And I think that's what when people hear, you know, a couple of well-heeled cable news hosts complaining that they might be targeted by the Trump administration, and it sounds a little ridiculous. It's not that, you know, jackboots are going to come knocking at your door and haul you away and send you to Gitmo. It's that a Trump administration can block a massive merger and can really do some damage to the bottom line of your parent company. Mm-hmm. And if that pressure is exacted on a massive corporation that really doesn't care about holding power to account, really cares about making profits.
That's where I want to go. That's where I want to go with this, because as you have, I mean, you've got all of these folks, right? All of these media companies, like news companies that are owned by entertainment or communications company, right? CBS is owned by Paramount. ABC owns, Disney owns ABC.
And by the way, Disney already put its hand on the stove in Florida and felt serious consequences from that.
Right. About the don't say gay thing, right? Yeah.
It's like there are consequences to that.
Yeah. And so then you have Comcast that owns NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, Telemundo. And then you have Warner Brothers, which owns CNN. And you heard, I mean, publicly, David Zaslav said this environment would be good for mergers and acquisitions and could be great for the country. My question is, now that we're seeing what's happening, Comcast has now said that they're going to spin off MSNBC and their cable news unit, except for Bravo or whatever. And so then what is the state of especially cable news, and how are journalists supposed to feel with that sort of weight and the knowledge of knowing what their bosses sort of want and maybe listening to? Like, how does that affect them in that environment? Are they nervous? Are they going to pull their punches?
I don't think that they're going to pull their punches. I think there's, to be honest, I think that if there's any retrenchment in the aggression of how the media covers Donald Trump, it will be born out of a desire to understand how the media messed up all of this. Because I think there's a lot of soul searching in the media about how, despite, you know, now what, a decade of Donald Trump being at the center of American politics, why the media's warnings about him being a threat fell on deaf ears, and how he still managed to win an election, 4 years after the January 6th riot at the Capitol. So I think if anything, a shift in the tone of coverage from perhaps like less hysterically oppositional to Donald Trump to a little bit more moderate, I think that's going to be born out of soul searching as opposed to any fear that Donald Trump might crack down. In my experience, journalists are the last thing. The last thing that works on them is when they're told they can't pursue a story.
Yeah.
That more than anything, that encourages them. So we're dealing with a community of people that do not respond well to that. So I don't think there's going to be any retrenchment in that regard. But I do think you're going to see a different approach in how Trump is covered. And I think that the Morning Joe voyage, down to Mar-a-Lago is perfectly encapsulates that.
Do you think that had Comcast had anything to do with that? Do you think the bosses on top said, "Hey, you guys"?
I haven't heard anything about that. The thing that I've heard from inside MSNBC was that they were concerned, that they were genuinely concerned about what Trump might do in a second term.
Okay, and folks at MSNBC now are like, they've been critical inside the network of Mika and Joe doing it. They're not happy with that, correct?
I think there's some concern inside that. To be honest, I think some of the response is mixed. Some people are understand. Stephanie Ruhle on air defended meeting with Trump. Others are grumbling about it, and especially when there's been a ratings exodus, an audience exodus.
Well, that's what I want to talk to you about, because folks said, look, they're afraid because they believe that the media now is obeying in advance. Don't do that. In a time where we need the media to be stronger than ever, it appears that they've become weaker than ever. So given that what happened with Mika and Joe on Morning Joe, when they did what they did, their ratings went down. Yeah. Cable news ratings in general are going down. The business is shrinking. So now what is the future? I believe you think you're concerned right now.
I'm very concerned. I'm not an alarmist at all, but I think obviously the economics of the industry have been shrinking for a very long time. People talk about the cable news cliff, which is basically, and Don, you know this well, the majority of profits for cable news companies come from carriage fees, which are paid by cable companies to host CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News on their airwaves. And that basically has been subsidized by people buying cable boxes for sports for a very long time. Now, the ratings are getting lower and lower as people cord cut and tune out and start watching news on YouTube more and other platforms. And so the audience is getting smaller. And at a certain point, those cable companies are going to turn around and say, okay, why are we paying CNN billions of dollars in carriage fees when no one's watching the network? Same thing for MSNBC, same thing for Fox News. Fox News will be a little bit delayed because their ratings are so good and they really cornered the market. But this is going to be a problem for these networks. And that paired with the election of Donald Trump, which I saw as a major repudiation of the media over the last couple of years, particularly MSNBC and CNN, which have spent these last couple of years warning about the threats of Donald Trump to no avail. That has made me very pessimistic about the future of the industry. I think a lot of people see mainstream media, if we want to call it that, as powerless as it has been in a very long time, particularly with the rise of independent media. And that scares me because these mainstream media outlets operate with far better guardrails for truth and standards for truth. They have fact-checking units. They have lawyers. They have accountability teams. When you submit a correction to CNN and they get something wrong, they correct the story. Yeah. If you submit a correction to a guy with a microphone, and like on a podcast, they're not going to correct that story.
They don't care.
Right. And so but I'm curious what you think, Don, about the future, because you're someone who, you cut your teeth, achieved some stardom in the traditional media, and now you're having a lot of success in streaming. So what do you think?
You want full honesty? Here's what I think. I think that the timing for me, I think, look, I don't like how it ended there. Like, I'm like, hey, where's my going away party after, with all that didn't happen. But I believe that timing is everything. And I feel like I just happen to be in a place now where I sort of have a jump on things to come, right? On the future. And that I happen to be in a position where I can try things, fail, and succeed. I do see the future here. I understand how to, to become, I'm an entrepreneur. I understand how to sell a product, how to deal with it editorially. I'm doing the whole thing, and folks are going to have to do that. It's not easy, but I love doing what I'm doing. I ran into my friend Oliver Darcy on the street, my former colleague, the other day, and we just were in the Village. I was walking my dogs. He was going to lunch, and I'm like, we're free. This is great. We can talk about these things. So I feel I 100% know in my bones that this is the future.
Yeah.
And that I will continue to figure it out. But I am loving what I am doing right now. And the thing that makes me different than other people, it's not just a guy with a microphone, is that I have 17 years of standards and practices.
Yeah.
Can this go on the air? Does this pass the smell test? Can you just say this? So I don't just tell people on my channels something for the sake of telling them, right? For getting clicks. People are on this channel were upset when I said, well, you know what? Joe Biden is going to have to go. The Democrats don't want him, whatever. They were like, oh, you're so anti this. When I told people, Kamala Harris doesn't have the support that she thinks she does among demographics who would usually vote. And Donald Trump does not either. This is a whole election that's completely different. I also talked about the demise of the influence, the waning influence of cable news. And folks did not believe me. And now here we are. So I think you're going to get more people like me. I do believe that there's going to be a floor with cable news, and they're going to figure it out, but it's going to be a much different thing. I do believe that the MSNBCs of the world and CNNs of the world, I think they're going to become sort of channels. I don't know if it's niche channels, but channels where they are going to farm out some of the things that were in-house, like some of the production, right? Some of the people who have shows. Maybe they'll hire my team. I'm just making this up, to do a show on their channel. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah, and they'll farm out some of the wire services to AP, and they'll farm out some of the teams that are going to be doing the shows, and they're going to farm out even the news gathering part of the organization, and it'll just be someone there who's presenting the news with a much bigger influence in streaming rather than on the cable linear end of it. How does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I think just certainly because, I think these cable companies are going to realize at a certain point that they're paying these enormous salaries to stars that are big on cable news, but not big on YouTube, which is kind of where the audience is. And so
fastest growing network in the world, the biggest network in the world.
Right. And this is going to be really interesting for MSNBC, to your point about how they're going to farm this stuff out, because MSNBC is now being cleaved off from NBC News.
Which is where they get their news, which is where, all their reporters.
If you watch MSNBC during the day, almost all of the reporters on air are from NBC News. So MSNBC is going to have to figure out whether it's a contributor model or whether they rent an NBC reporter today, something like that. But what do you think about the ratings for the next 4 years? Do you think the audiences are going to come? Because CNN and MSNBC had huge boom time in Trump's first term. I think there's a little bit of a concern that
I think it's different this time. I think people are kind of over it. I think people are, this, as you know, because you are the editor-in-chief, is full of meetings, right? So yesterday I had a meeting with Spotify, I had a meeting with YouTube, I had a meeting with, we had a meeting with TikTok, I had a meeting with Snapchat. Like, you do all these things. And so there are all these different sort of distribution places where your content and monetization, right? So here's what I believe. And, I know some folks who are, sort of high up in the business, and we talk about these things. I believe that, yes, digital is the future, but right now, linear pays the bills. And to think that you cannot still have a good linear product that draws people to make people watch, I think is short-sighted. I think that you can still have a good linear product, but you have to have people and situations and characters, quite frankly, as Fox knows, in place that people want to watch. You can still make appointment television, I believe, on cable news. It cannot just be something that's anodyne and bland especially in prime time. You need people who people want to watch. I mean, people, as much as you may dislike Pete Hegseth, he was an interesting character.
He's a
people want to
personality.
watch him. He's a personality. Sean Hannity, he's a personality. Rachel Maddow has a personality. You have to have those things because right now linear still pays the bills. People still tune in to CNN, to the linear product. And in order to move folks over to digital, you have to give them something that's interesting and strong to get people interested in going over. They're just not going to go over because, I'm just saying, Don Lemon has the book club on whatever. You have to give them something interesting, and you got to give them, especially at night, people who have something to say and let them do their thing. That's how I feel. So I don't believe that MSNBC's ratings or CNN's ratings really have to slide that much. I think that they just have to put on an interesting product that people want to watch until they can get some more folks to go over to the digital side of it.
Yeah, and the tricky part is that you're right. The money's in linear, and the money's always going to be better in linear.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
And also, here's the thing that it's interesting because it's so different when you have meetings with different people, when you talk to different people, when you talk to the people who are in streaming, they have a whole different idea of what is important, what people click on, what people watch. And then you go over to the folks who work traditionally in television, and it's all about sort of these sort of micro breaking news story, the latest like moment to moment thing that happens with Donald Trump and the cabinet. And when you actually go out and talk to people, they have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. Yeah. They're like, I have no idea. When I said, how do you feel about Pete Hegseth? When I go out and talk to people, they're like, who's that?
Who's that? Yeah.
Right. And then, the folks who are in cable or whatever, like, oh, we got to get that on. We got to get that on. It's a whole different thing. You can get all the breaking news stuff that you want on an alert or on social media. But if you want conversation and you want to dig into a story as we are doing now and actually explore it, you can do that easily on digital. This will live on. It may start off with not a lot of views. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, that got 500,000 views or that got 1 million views, because people want to absorb things rather than just having it sort of in their face as you see, but boom, 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 breaking news. No one lives that way anymore. When I've been traveling a lot, I used to, as soon as I got to a hotel room, I would turn on the cable news and see what's happening in the world. I rarely even turn the television on anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're not watching CNN, MSNBC, or Fox, really?
No, I'll turn in. If I do, I'll tune in to. I tune into Fox more just to kind of see if they have their hair, and it's completely different than what MSNBC has on. And by the way, folks will not on Fox will they'll run the Pete Hegseth story, but they won't dig into it like other places, and so that audience will have no idea.
No idea
about that, right? And then conservative media, they'll have no idea. Everybody's narrowcasting in their own little bubbles. No, I don't really tune in that much.
Well, that's the problem, and I think the scariest thing about media today is that I had Chris Wallace. I did an interview with Chris Wallace a couple weeks ago, and he put it well. He said, "We live in a media climate that is choose your own adventure now."
Yeah,
it's been a couple years, and I think the Trump's election really put a nail in the coffin of the monoculture. This idea that we all live in a shared reality where information we can all agree upon, that does not exist anymore. We live in totally different information silos, so that your perception of what happens is completely different from somebody else's, and that's a big problem. People in the media have to think about how we get back to a shared point of reality. It can start with the cable news networks.
Well, I got to tell you though, as well, if you are, when I was sort of and look, no shade to anyone. So I'm not, I'm just, this is just.
No shade people.
I'm not shading people, but what I'm saying is if you're just someone who is delivering the news, just sort of reading the news every single day, you're going to have a tough time when you have to, because everyone is going to have to transition over to this. People like, if you notice in streaming as well, people like people with personalities. Like Joe Rogan has a personality. Right. He's very interesting. Joe Rogan was never just like, let's go to such and such. Good evening. Hello, everybody. Blah, blah. Let's go to such and such at the White House. That's not who Joe Rogan is. That's not who even Lex Friedman is. That's not who sort of the people who are influential and who have even Tucker Carlson. That's not who Tucker. It's people who have something to say. So I think if you are, as you said, a cable news star just from kind of sitting there and reading the news, in this new streaming world, I believe it's tough Chris Wallace, it's going to be tough for him. It was tough for me.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that with knowledge. And I like Chris. It's going to be tough for him to sort of find his niche in, in this streaming world. There's a lot of competition, a lot of people with microphones.
Yeah, and I think the one of the problems, and I don't know if you've noticed this in your foray onto YouTube, as you've built up a nice audience, but there are strong incentives to be partisan. I was talking to a guy that manages a YouTube channel, and he said that they started doing really aggressive anti-Trump stuff where every title of every YouTube video was, Trump humiliated, and it worked. And now that's all they do, even though the website that the YouTube page is attached to is a lot more nuanced. And so I think that there's a gap in the market for moderate, smart, nuanced conversation. But as you know, the most important thing is personality. I think it's a harder hill to climb. The partisans have it a lot easier. But if you are going to do nuanced, smart coverage like you do, Don, you have to have a good personality. And not a lot of people that work in cable news are able to carry that on their own.
Yeah, but you have to build an audience. People aren't going to come to you just because you are, cable news star with the nice haircut. They're not just going to come to you for that. You have to build an audience. I had to build an audience. And, when I go out now, at first people were like, oh, the young folks, a lot of them were like, oh my God, hey, Don Lemon, older people. Oh my God, or my grandmother loves you, or my mom and dad love you, to watch you every night. And now, since I've been doing what I'm doing, especially on social media, young people come to me. I was at a Spotify conference the other day, and they were like, oh my God, I love what you're doing. I love how you've embraced this. Now my demo is getting younger, which will be helpful, right, for my present and for my future. But you have to build that, and you have to give it time. And it takes a while, because in order to do that, you've got to invest. And some folks are going to be investing without those $1 million salaries that they used to have at cable news. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the hard part. I've always found that it is easier for conservative and right-wing voices to go independent.
Of course. They have cult-like audiences. They
have extremely obsessive audiences. And also, if you are, if you had previously worked in legacy media, let's say you worked at the New York Times or at ABC News, and you go independent, the audience that loved watching you on ABC is just going to continue watching ABC News. Where if Tucker Carlson leaves Fox News, he's going to be able to find an audience independently. So I think that audience is much more geared towards, probably since the rise of talk radio in the 90s, is much more geared towards personalities.
Yeah.
They have their personalities that they're obsessed with, where I would say more centrist and liberal audiences, or it's changing a little bit on the left, but are more interested in watching the institutional media, for their news. But again, all of this is changing because people, the average viewership of MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News is 69 to 71. And so that is changing rapidly. And the amount of people, anyone under the age of 50 is watching their TV online. They're watching their news online.
Aiden, this was supposed to be 25 minutes. I said, Aiden, can you do 25 minutes? Yes, it's been an hour, but you've been asked, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
If you don't mind. So were you surprised sort of by the waning influence and the sort of reality that was revealed through the election of traditional media, especially cable media? And how long does this party last?
I wasn't surprised. It was one of those things where, this is funny, whenever Trump wins an election, in the 2 times that he has, people always freak out and say, oh my God, the polls were so wrong. The pundits were so wrong. And it's always incorrect. The polls were fine. They pretty much had Trump winning narrowly, which he did. And the punditry pretty much accounted that all along. I think the difference is, the thing that people complain about is that, like in 2016, I don't think people thought that there was a possibility Trump could win because he's Donald Trump. In 2016, he was Donald Trump. He was the guy from The Apprentice, a bit of a buffoon. How could he possibly win an election? And then he defeats Hillary Clinton. In 2024, I think people were a little bit more prepared for that reality, but still thought, after everything he's been through, the impeachments, the indictments, January 6th, there's no way he can win another election. And then he did. And so I was, stunned, I think like anyone was, that Donald Trump would be returning to the White House. But I wasn't necessarily surprised. This was probably the likely outcome of that election. So I did not really reckon with the consequence that this would have for the media until the morning after the election. Yeah. And
I kind of knew just from talking. You saw my interviews, right?
Oh, well, yeah, of course.
I was just
your interviews were you'd speak to 5 different young people and they'd all say how much they love Trump. He's a meme now. So,
people laughed at, look, he's an idiot. He's going to McDonald's. And I'm like, but that is the most shared meme.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So people get, hey, I know we've been talking about, breaking news and the nature of this. I want you to hear something, and then I want to get your response to it. This is new on RFK audio that has been uncovered by the K-File over, that's at CNN, from his radio show, where he read and praised the description of Trump and his supporters as belligerent idiots, outright Nazis, and cowards and bootlickers. Okay, here it is.
One of the things that you write so beautifully, and your stuff is so fun to read, but you write about Trump, quote, the way that you build a truly vicious nationalist movement is to wed a relatively small core of belligerent idiots to a much larger group of opportunists and spineless fellow travelers whose primary function is to turn a blind eye to things. We may not have that many outright Nazis in America, but we have plenty of cowards and bootlickers. And once those fleshy dominoes start tumbling into the Trump camp, the game is up. When you talk about fleshy dominoes, Chris Christie comes to mind.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think? Does it matter?
I mean, nothing matters. J.D. Vance called Trump Hitler 2 years ago or whatever. I mean, the crazy part about that comment is that he's describing himself. He's saying we don't have a lot of Nazis in America, but we have a lot of cowards who will go along with Donald Trump.
Yeah, he's one of them now.
In the name of promoting their own careers. So, whether or not you think that of Donald Trump, RFK Jr. clearly did. But my God, what a turn. I mean,
oh my God, Aiden.
But it's interesting. I had an interview with Vivek Ramaswamy a couple months ago.
My buddy, my pal.
Yeah, yeah. And he wrote in his book in 2022, so just 2 years ago, he wrote that Donald Trump was ashamed himself, tried to overturn our democracy, should never be near presidential office again. And I asked him about it, and he got very upset. He said, "Why are we talking about ancient history? I don't want to talk about old comments. You keep bringing up the past." I was like, "This is 2 years ago. You said these things." And so, I mean, this is a pattern. I mean, almost everyone that Trump has nominated to serve in his cabinet previously criticized him in harsh terms. And this isn't just, Obama saying that Hillary Clinton, isn't right to be president. This is calling him Hitler, calling people who enable him cowards and bootlickers, calling him dangerous. Even Pete Hegseth, who has been a Trump loyalist for years now, back in 2016 was on Megyn Kelly's show on Fox News and said that Donald Trump's foreign policy was totally incoherent. So it's a pattern. It clearly doesn't matter. Donald Trump just got elected president with the vice presidential pick who called him Hitler all but 3 years ago. But I mean, hearing it in those stark terms is always fun.
Aiden McLaughlin, I owe you lunch, dinner, or drinks or something. And there's someone who's not far away from me here who is a very dear friend of yours. You know who I'm talking about. I just ran into her this morning, and I invited her to go to the diner with me, but she declined. And we had a disagreement on coffee places in the neighborhood. And she said, "Don't tell anybody. I love Dunkin'." Am I a serial killer? I'm like, wait, what? No, I can't say that word. But anyways, yeah. So she's a great. You surround yourself with great people, and you're a great guy. So I appreciate it. I appreciate it, and I'll be leaning on you soon. Thank you for coming on for the breaking news. Be well and be in touch. Aiden McLaughlin, editor-in-chief of Mediaite. Thank you very much, sir. I'll see you soon. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Guys, you're up to date on, my God, I think this is probably the biggest story of the day. It's going to be the biggest story of the week. Let's see if it matters. Now you have all of these folks who have some sort of essay allegations, essay adjacent, from Linda McMahon, what happened at WWE, to Pete Hegseth, to Matt Gaetz, and on and on and on, or affairs that they have had, RFK Jr., Pete Hegseth, Gates. I mean, So here we go. Let's see what happens with that. Hey, I would like to speak to you guys. I'm just so glad that you were here, and I wanted to get you guys to come on. I wanted to get Aiden to come on to update you guys, because when I read this morning, and Aiden is someone who I know well, I wanted to get it on. So thank you. Love Dunkin' Coffee, someone says. So they're all disgusting, says Toy B. Thank you, Aiden, says be kind to each other. Dunkin' is pretty good. Don't tell me about it. I kind of like Starbucks coffee. There's also a good coffee shop and a good coffee place in my neighborhood called Madman, which is good, and it's always packed. The line is out the door. Hey, nothing wrong with Dunkin' Donuts, Dunkin' Coffee, or as they say, it used to be Dunkin' Donuts. Now it's just Dunkin'. So, but I think everywhere coffee's way too expensive. It doesn't cost that much to make. The profit margins are huge. I just think they need to bring the price of coffee down a little bit. Come on, y'all. That's ridiculous, the amount that whatever. So thank you all. Look, check out everything. Make sure you smash the hearts if you're on TikTok. Please hit our subscribe button on YouTube, because it is free to subscribe. You get great stuff. And so we appreciate it. We are growing, but hit that subscribe button, share it with your folks. When else do you get information like this? Where else? And do you get fair stuff, not just sort of crazy partisan stuff? I tell you the truth, whether you like it or not, okay? So thank you all. I will see you at 5. I got a big day ahead of me. I'm actually going to the dentist. I had a crown that broke right here in the back. I got to go get it fixed and then get my choppers clean. So I'm going to head to the dentist, and I'm headed to a bunch of meetings today, and then I'm going to see you guys. Let me know, please, what you would like to talk about. What do you want me to talk about at 5? If you've learned anything new, get into the community page. Let me know on social media. Hit the thumbs up, please. Hit the thumbs up. And I thank you so much, Lemonation. Bye, Lemonheads. See ya. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure you hit the like button. It helps us with the algorithm. And also, we'd love for you to become a subscriber. So hit that button, too. We're live every day at 10 a.m. Eastern Time and 5 p.m. Eastern, so there's plenty of content for you to check out.